Hi, everyone. Thank you for waiting and apologies for starting the meeting a couple minutes late. If you just bear with me, I will start sharing my screen just to show you a couple of slides before we dig into the topic. All right, so welcome to this Co-op for CBD session, the fourth session this week out of 6 webinars to present to you a number of thematic agenda items scheduled for discussion at the upcoming 28th session of the CBD's subsidiary body on scientific, technical, and technological advice, or SBSTTA. We have 6 sessions scheduled this week. This is the fourth session, as I mentioned. Monday was on marine and coastal biodiversity. Tuesday was on IPBES, presenting the business and biodiversity assessment. Yesterday was on synthetic biology. Today is our session on planning, monitoring, reporting, and review. Tomorrow will be our session on the program of work on protected areas, and Monday will be the last session on sustainable wildlife management. All sessions are recorded and will be made available on the website. These sessions are provided to you by the Co-op for CBD project, as I mentioned, which aims to facilitate technical and scientific cooperation for decisions under the CBD to be informed by the best available knowledge and advice towards the achievement of the 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature. Today's session, as I mentioned, will focus on planning, monitoring, reporting, and review, presented by Juliette Landry and Ros Emerzel. Juliette is a senior research fellow at IDRI, the Institute for Sustainable Development and International Relations. She works on international biodiversity governance with a particular focus on accountability issues, biodiversity finance, and the political dynamics shaping the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, or the GBF as we call it. She regularly engages with governments, international organizations, and civil society to support dialogue and inform policy discussions on biodiversity governance. On her side, Ros works as a researcher at the Netherlands Environmental Assessment Agency, PBL. Her research focuses on international biodiversity policy, and currently her main focus lies on analyzing to what extent and in what ways party countries to the CBD contribute to the goals and targets set in the Global Biodiversity Framework. Ros has a background in international relations and organizations, and after that has specialized in governance of sustainability issues. Juliette and Ros, as I mentioned, will be presenting the item on planning, monitoring, reporting, and review, for which the CBD Secretariat has published documents CBD/substa/28/2/add1 and add2, respectively, on the draft global report and on the monitoring framework. To my knowledge, the draft recommendation has yet to be published by the Secretariat. At least I checked 5 minutes before this webinar. And before I hand it over to Juliette and Ros, I'll just go over a few ground rules for this session. Just very quickly, the presentations will last 30 minutes, followed by a 30-minute Q&A that will allow a discussion between you and the speakers. Please keep your microphones shut when you're not speaking and raise your hand to ask a question to the speakers. Please introduce yourself when you speak for the first time. As I mentioned, this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be made available on the Co-op for CBD website, along with the PowerPoint presentations from all the sessions held this week. And please, if you'd like to join our Co-op for CBD expert database and become an expert in the project, you can scan this QR code and join the project. I'll give you a minute if you wish to scan it before we start.
Sorry, but we are not actually not seeing that.
You're not seeing it? Oh, really? That's interesting. Thank you for flagging that.
We're still on the first slide. Yeah, now it's on the good slide.
Is it showing up now? That's
yes.
Strange. I'm sorry about that. Did you also get to see the second slide with my beautiful table of all the sessions?
No.
No. All right. Well, just so you see it, I hope you see it now, because it is nice. All right,
no,
so I will, you can't, okay, whatever, I'm just going to give up on that. So then, Juliette and Ros, you have the floor, please.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm with Rose. Today we're going to present what's at stake for the global review of collective progress. And Rose is really fast, and she already displayed the slides, so thank you for that. I'm going to start, and we are going to try to have some kind of a dynamic conversation with Rose on this issue. We've been looking at the global review and how it has been unfolding for the past year. Especially as it is the first global review of the collective progress, and we wanted maybe before presenting what's at stake and also what's in the global report, which has been released on the 1st of June, and I'm sure you've heard about that. We wanted maybe to take a step back and please, Rose, can you go to the first slide? We wanted to just introduce really briefly what's the history behind the global review and what's the history of the planning, monitoring, reporting, and review negotiation item at the CBD. Everything related to transparency first started with and accountability first started well before COP15, because in the treaty, as you know, parties have the obligation to submit national reports, but also national biodiversity strategies and action plans. SBI was then created after an ad hoc working group on implementation. A subsidiary body on implementation was created also to follow the implementation, to accelerate the implementation of the CBD. So everything related to implementation then is reviewed by the COP also, and that is in the treaty. And after we had Aichi targets, and we also had a few reports, for instance, the global biodiversity outlooks, the fourth one, the fifth one, but also some before that. We had some kind of collective assessments, but it was weekly connected to the COP, if I can say it really worthily. And we had overall a weaker accountability framework. So that's why at COP15, parties adopted the planning, monitoring, reporting, and review multidimensional approach with a few components. First, we have now a new process, which is national targets, made to so that parties can align with the global targets and submit their own national targets and say, okay, this target is to achieve this target and this target at the global level as contributions. We still have NBSAPs, of course, and all of that is contributing to what we call the global analysis of the ambition, which is at every COP. And then on implementation, we do have the national reports, which are again there, but now we have a common reporting format and other inputs. All of that together feed into the global review, which is happening right now, culminating at COP17, and then we're going to have a second global review for COP19. We do have other mechanisms, but that's not the topic for today. But we also have the commitments by actors other than governmental. And we do have a format for submission that was adopted by COP. We do have also regional dialogues, voluntary peer review, and that's all of that creates this multidimensional approach. So there is some kind of machine working all together. Next slide, please, Rose. So that's where we are. We have this timeline from 2022 to 2030. We are now really in the middle, so we're halfway the implementation of the GBF, and that's why the first global review of collective progress is really important, because it will enable us to take stock of what has been happening for the past 4 years, with as a primary basis, as a primary input, the national reports that were submitted before February this year, and then hopefully will create some kind of dynamic to accelerate action, implementation, maybe ambition also between now and 2030, and hopefully make it possible to achieve the targets. And so we have another cycle of review between 2028 and 2030, which is also to have in mind, because this is a great exercise right now, and this is we're going to have lessons to take into account to inform the next cycle. Please, next slide. Yeah, that's yours.
That's fine. Thank you, Juliette. So IDRI and PBL, we've collectively been working on what a global review can look like for the past years. And in an ideal world, the global review would be purpose-oriented. So it aims to track progress, but not just to show a picture of what progress looks like, but also really to identify gaps, barriers, and solutions to improve the GBF's implementation. It would be a multi-stakeholder approach to build on inclusivity and participation, multi-evidence-based, which could provide a more comprehensive understanding of what progress looks like, but also of what opportunities are out there and what challenges are faced, for example. And simultaneously, it would make the gaps in the process clear, so we can proactively identify and fill those types of gaps. But more in a more pragmatic, realistic view, and what we're seeing that's happening, this is the very first global review process, so we also have to be realistic about what we can do and what is important in this first round of review. We see that the starting point is indeed getting a better understanding of what collective progress looks like. And inclusivity is there, but in a way of reviewing what's being done on Section C of the GBF's framework, on means of implementation, on analyzing the non-state box in the ORT, for example, the online reporting tool. And similarly, there are alternative ways of creating a more multi-evidence-based review through, for example, shadow reporting, conducting peer reviews, and more voluntary stakeholder involvement, I would say. We do see some gaps emerge from this first global review process and this first exercise of writing the global report, which can be addressed at SBSTA. So that will be my next slide to show you more practically what has been happening and what will happen until COP17 in October. So the global report is based on data collected up until February, which is here on the left side. This has already happened. And based on this, the first global report is drafted. This is done under guidance and oversight of the ASHTAG, so the Ad Hoc Scientific and Technical Advisory Group. And the first draft of the global report is released now and can be reviewed until the end of this month. And then at SBSTA in next month, the evidence base of the global report will be considered, and the robustness, credibility, and the findings can be considered and discussed there, which will be taken up at SBI, which is right after. SBI will integrate the SBSTA recommendations and will translate them, those findings into how to move ahead. There will be some informal technical dialogues at Kunming between SBI and COP to strengthen the ownership and the findings of the report, and then at COP the decisions can be finalized with an overall narrative and underlining the findings. And something that I now skipped over, but we are curious to see at SBSTA with what language the global report will be taken up. So if it will be welcomed or endorsed or adopted, because this is also the first time. So we're curious to see, the way in which SBSTA will take up the findings of the report.
Thank you, Rose. Before we dive a little bit deeper into also our own analysis of the global report, which is something we wanted to share with you today, we wanted to remind maybe, and I know that the slides may be shared after this webinar, and so we wanted to just have a quick overview of the mandate of the global review, because this is important to have in mind. Is also in order to have a successful global review, has to respect the mandate, as you all know. And so there is the COP decision that was adopted at COP15, that decided to conduct this global review, and that also recognized that parties may take into account, may take the outcome of the global review into account when, if they want to revise and update their NBSAPs, which is kind of really voluntary right now, but this is there. And then we have the modalities that were adopted at COP16 in Rome, and then the outline of the global report, which was adopted by SBSTTA. So everything related to that is really important to have in mind, because it created some kind of legitimacy and credibility of the global review and the global report compared to maybe previous assessments that were not really that were not really politically led, I would say. I won't dive deeper into that, but please, can we go to the next slide, Rose? So this is why we wanted to have we wanted to assess the global report in light of some kind of a reading grid, because there was really no single way for reading the report. And I know that Rose also has a way of reading the report. I have mine, and we do have different ways. But what I was asking myself, for instance, before reading it is the global report credible? Is it legitimate? Is it what the content tells us, and what can we imagine in terms of next steps from what is in the global report? In terms of the first two questions, what I can say really quickly is that I think it is an unprecedented basis for assessment. As I say, we have really lots and lots of data from the 129 national reports, but also thousands, and I think 3,700 national targets, and NBSAPs from 85 NBSAPs from parties. But of course, we do have several data gaps and limits, as Rose was introducing. So we know that a lot of parties were struggling with providing, for instance, data sets in line with the indicators they submitted, and they have to align with. Lots of uneven reporting in terms of both quality and within the targets. So I know that also Rose will consider that, so I won't dive deeper into that, but this is also to take into account, and that's why this is a first global review that is unprecedented, but it still has some gaps, even though I think it's quite legitimate, because it was made as a party-led process, and it's mandated by the CBD process, and you can see you can see in the global report the fact that it is primarily based on national realities, national reports and experiences. So in that sense, it created some kind of insurance for parties to adopt this report as a party-led report, which creates then the legitimacy for the kind of the decisions that happens afterwards. Even though what could be interesting is maybe to complement this report with additional analysis, global benchmarks, assessments from IBES, from other assessments, in order to create a conversation on the ways forward. And there are some opportunities to do that with, for instance, the Kunming dialogue in September, or at SBSTTA, SBI, in order to create this dialogue on, okay, what can happen next. And of course, we know that the global report may not change too much between now and SBSTTA, but there are still some clarity around the methodologies, for instance, and the data gaps. And then we do have the content. So please, next slide, Rose. Just quickly, if we can present the structure of the report. There is the overall narrative on collective progress halfway to 2030. What the global report underlines is that, of course, there is significant engagement, momentum, unprecedented. Again, that's the term they use. But there is also uneven ambition, implementation, and support, and we are not likely to achieve 2030 targets. So they are really clear on the fact that, yes, we are moving forward, but that's not enough. And there is a detailed assessment of all 23 targets and all 4 goals. This is the main part of the global report, which is more than 340 pages. And this part assesses the different targets, target by target, even the different elements within targets, both on ambition and implementation and on challenges and good practices. Then we do have a part on means of implementation. What's interesting after that is that all of those findings made it possible to have 6 cross-cutting messages and 2 messages on planning, monitoring, reporting, and review to make that possible to improve the second global review. And based on those 6 cross-cutting messages, there are possible opportunities that are also underlined. Some are really broad, like increased efforts on helpful subsidies, and some are quite more operational and more conceptual opportunities. Yes, please, next slide. And some overall takeaway messages, which is really not surprising, but some targets are better honed or better aligned with at the national level than others, especially the ones that are more traditional or related to biodiversity protection, area-based targets, and so on. So the other targets, which are much more socioeconomic targets, are maybe a little bit more behind. So what we understand is that parties obviously are more comfortable with acting on biodiversity directly, because maybe this is the case for ministries of environment that are engaged with the CBD, than on the economic governance, socioeconomic transformation, sectoral transformation, etc. We know that the biodiversity outcomes are not progressing at the same pace as commitments, and this is something that is quite difficult to demonstrate, because of course after 4 years you don't know, like the indicators on the progress on the ground are not directly following the indicators on the actions that are taking place. So this is also something that we know we have to improve over time. This is creating some kind of a baseline where we can maybe see the impact of policies over time. And there are persistent bias towards what is visible and what is measurable, and what maybe create action. And so there is lower attention overall to some biomes, such as marine, coastal, inland water ecosystems, to some practices such as connectivity, integrity, to whole of society approaches, whole of government approaches, participation, means of implementation, finance. So that's something also that could become priorities as ways forward. Please, yes, I don't remember what's next.
Thanks. Yeah, so indeed, these are some of the takeaway messages we find, and then we're also thinking about how can we build onto these messages that we find in the global report. And we can do that in several ways. And as Juliette already said, we can also read the report in several ways. So my focus is very much target by target, and I will use that to illustrate opportunities of building onto the messages. But first, I wanted to shortly share this snippet of the global report in which it states what its purpose is. So the aim of the global report is to provide an overview of collective progress towards the implementation of the framework. And to do that, it analyzes collective ambition, collective implementation, challenges, gaps, and opportunities, and non-prescriptive approaches. Just as a short introduction. And also already shared by Juliette, the main takeaway or a overarching message is, though many countries have set national targets and updated MBSEPs or uploaded national reports, collective effort still falls short to the GBF's ambition. And then we could stop there and take away, well, we need to step up ambition and implementation. We need to do better. But there are many types of gaps that we see emerge if you read the text. Many barriers, but also different solutions. There are also difficulties in how to assess and report. So how to make the global report itself, or how to come up, or not come up, but how to write your national report, for example. So there are many types of gaps that are emerging from this first exercise. And all of these limits to the report already help us to get a better understanding of how to be more specific in our follow-up and how to build onto the messages to both improve PMRR and the GBF's implementation. So therefore we are asking these patterns in efforts and progress, these different gaps and limits, what differentiated governance and cooperation responses could be developed based on that. So to illustrate, I will compare two targets and some of the findings. I want to, as a note, say this is not at all complete, but just to share some thoughts to get started, I guess. So starting with target 3, the famous 30 by 30 target. On the right side, I adjusted not adjusted, but I took the scorecard as the report shows. And in the center is a graph of our work at PBL, in which we analyzed how many countries have described quantified ambition and what does the quantified ambition look like, both for terrestrial and inland water areas and marine and coastal areas. And what we see for target 3 is that in general, there's quite a lot, especially compared to the other targets, there's a lot of attention going to the areas. There are a lot of countries that have submitted quantified commitments, so almost 80% of the parties that submitted national targets, which is in line with the scorecard that the CBD also shows, that it's green, the area target elements, but there's less attention for more the effectiveness of protected areas, for equitable governance, for example, respecting and recognizing the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities. And our calculations suggest that if we implement these area-based targets, we will not reach 30 by 30, but we will be very close. And I also want to note that there are some targets that are not quantified but do show ambition. So if you compare this to the other targets, of course we could step up ambition of area, which is also important, but we can also see and decide maybe we should pay more attention now on how to implement this ambition. So move towards the implementation phase. And also focus, for example, more on how to govern these areas equitably and pay more attention to these types of elements that are falling behind. And then there are also some findings from the global report below that suggest that more technical focus of how to do this stocktake exercise and how to implement the target might be a good base of discussion for target 3. And then if you compare that to target 16, which is, which is on sustainable consumption, the patterns look different. There's more, everything is yellow or orange in the scorecard. There's very little quantification, even though there is an element in the target that is quantified, which is on halving global food waste. But in general, we see here that there are less countries that are even coming up with targets aligned to target 16. They are often not made very smart, so not measurable or specific, which is in line also with that there's no headline indicator for this target in the monitoring framework, for example. So then based on that, we could maybe think about how do we make this more measurable, and also based on the finding that countries describe themselves that it's difficult to work on this target. We should start maybe with that instead of already moving to implementation, or of course both at the same time. But it's a different type of pattern that emerges. And here the report describes that there is good progress in developing policy instruments for encouraging and enabling sustainable consumption. So the gaps are more on how to then measure what these instruments are doing and how to measure what ambition looks like. And yeah, just to give a small overview and then back to Juliette.
Yes, thank you. So yeah, really we wanted to make you think about the different ways of looking at this assessment target by target with some examples by rows, but also with cross-cutting messages, which is the first part of the global report right now. And we do have this summary of the global report with the key messages, the narrative, and the full report, and what would be then at stake for the negotiations and the recommendations at SBSTA. But also we wanted to mention SBI and COP, because you know that this is part of the schedule moving towards COP, as introduced by Rose earlier. And what was part of the discussion, I think, was, and we don't have the recommendation right now, I think still this morning, I think it was not available. But what would be considered is how the global report is going to be talked about and presented at SBSTA. And so I try to maybe exemplify what would be the pros and cons of having different ways of introducing the global report. If you want to have some kind of fully technical, independent scientific report, of course, it has to be quite separate from the negotiations. And then if you want to have a fully negotiated report, it creates some kind of high political ownership on the right and upper part of the figure, but there is a risk of dilution, and it's really not possible to negotiate a report for 340 pages. So what could be considered and what is maybe considered by the Secretariat and by parties and the COP Bureau is maybe to have something between those two cases. And maybe it could be like the global stocktake format, which was having a technical, for the UNFCCC, which was having a technical report with a separate decision, taking note, welcoming this report. But now that we have some lessons from the global stocktake of climate, we know that a criticism that I saw quite a lot was the fact that it was too separate. And then that the technical report was kind of forgotten in the end. What could be also another way is having a summary approved line by line, which is the case for IPCC, IPBES summary for policymakers, but it's also quite difficult, and we don't know how SBSTA could handle that. So maybe what could be an in-between, and maybe this would be in the recommendation, we don't know yet, could be having the summary being discussed, but as a whole, not negotiated line by line, and could be taking note of being part of the recommendation with an annex. But that would be for sure a part of the discussion at SBSTA, so that you have that in mind. And then I think next and last slide, I think. Yeah. So the negotiation issues, as I said, would be first, how will the global report be discussed, which parts, as I presented just before. And then it would also be around the findings of the global report. Is SBSTA thinking collectively, okay, the global report is a good basis, the findings are robust, balanced, we agree with the key messages, and we recognize several key messages and put and transfer those key messages to SBI that is going to consider the next steps for those key messages. So that would be part of the discussion, and what language would be used by SBSTA. There, it's more or less strong, as you know. It could be take note, welcome, adopt, endorse, many possibilities. the stronger it is, the stronger it has implications. And then the recommendation will be integrated in SBI. And so I think what the conversation that start to emerge right now is beyond the technicalities around the global report, the methodologies, the gaps, what parties will consider in terms of ways forward. And we are starting this conversation. We are really in the middle right now, where we are going from the technical part to the more political part. Another point of discussion may be what format would be which format for the COP decision or decisions. It could be one COP decision on the global review. It could also be several COP decisions. In the mandate, there's the possibility to have both. It could be an umbrella decision with links to the others. It could be a cover decision, having a stronger impact or implication for others. So yeah, many possibilities. Maybe what's unfolding right now would be much more of a one COP decision with links to others. For instance, there is an opportunity in the global report around technical, scientific, and cooperation centers, and they are advising in the global report that those centers, the TSCC, could invest more in this and that. And so maybe there could be like a general decision in the global review decision that is linked to the capacity building and development agenda item as well. So that's just to an example of how those links could be made. So yeah, that's all for us, and thank you for listening to Rose and me.
Thank you to you both. I will mention, as it's been mentioned several times in different arenas, but the peer review is open until the 29th and is really the biggest opportunity you'll have to provide feedback and make sure it's included by SBSTTA-28, because then the process is going to be very tight. And so I think it's best to make sure you submit as many comments as you have before the 29th, instead of waiting to bring things up in negotiations where there is no guarantee that they would actually be taken up if they weren't submitted in the peer review. I wonder if there are any questions for our amazing speakers today. Yes, Eduardo, please. Maybe that was a glitch, or maybe a technical difficulty. Okay, so feel free to put your question in the chat and I can read it out loud for you if that's easier, or we can wait for you to figure out your technical difficulties and maybe go to another question in the meantime. Any other questions?
I also asked in the chat who is going to Kunming, just out of curiosity, because it has just been announced. So yeah.
Yes, so maybe when people ask a question, they can also mention if they're planning on going to Kunming or trying to go to Kunming or not. James, I see your hand is up, please.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for that very interesting presentation from both of you. James Williams, I work for UK Joint Edge Conservation Committee, and I was co-chair of the RTEG that helped to develop the operationalization of the indicators. I think there's a couple of comments I would make, if I may, and in some ways they're more comments than questions. I think the first one is there's a lot of really good information to be mined within the report. And I think the authors are to be commended for how much they've been able to do in the time available, because quite frankly, they've had an enormous amount of material to go through. So given that, and given much of it is factual, I think your comment about sort of what is worth negotiating is important in terms of what actually does get discussed at Sub-Saharan COP. And I would argue that where there are facts, there's not a lot of point in negotiating them, because this is the number of parties that have responded saying X. So that's it, basically. The other thing I think I would just note, and this is something that I'm hoping there will come out more detail from the INF document that I think we're expecting to be published before SBSTA, and I haven't seen that yet either, is the analysis of how much the monitoring framework has been taken up. And if it is of interest, I have actually done a little bit of work on how many parties responded to which headline indicator, for example. So I can show some graphs on that if that would be of interest to people.
I think, yes, please go ahead. That would be
in
great.
which case, can you make me able to share, please? Because I
Let's see.
think that button is not available to me at the moment.
All right, let me try and figure this out. In the meantime, while I do that, maybe Juliette, did you want to respond before we take another question? Was that directly to that point?
Yeah, you can take another question. I just wanted to react.
So I think I see a question from Takadveni, if you want to go ahead and ask your question. And then in the meantime, James, I'll figure out the screen sharing thing.
Thank you so much. Can you confirm if you can hear me? Thank you. My name is Ntakadzeni Chidada. I'm the director at the South African National Biodiversity Institute. I'm also the lead of the SANBI Technical and Scientific Cooperation Support Center, supporting 9 countries to implement the KMGBF. So I think there are certain observations that were made, and critical to it is the role of the Technical and Scientific Cooperation Support Centers. I think it's not coming as vividly as I could have thought. Particularly, we had prepared the annual reports in the operationalization phase of the TSCC, and there were a number of gaps and opportunities that may arise that needed to feed in to the global report, and I'm not seeing that role coming out as one would have expected, because one of the key things that I needed to highlight is that the report in some areas, it does mention that capacity building and technical and scientific cooperation support, it's happening. But one key thing is that it's happening at an ad hoc basis based on the fact that there's no resources to support with the operationalizations of the TSCCs that were established by the Conference of the Parties, and that has a limitation and a bearing on the delivery of the framework. And I think that needs to come up. And I feel like there are certain areas on pathways or whatever that they are referring to in terms of the recommendations, to also make a recommendation around the need to provide resources to the TSCCs to support parties equally. And this will also link back to the articles of the convention, as well as the preamble text of the convention that says that developing parties also need to be supported, or access to technical and scientific cooperation will then assist with the meeting the 3 objectives of the convention. Another key thing that I would also want to agree with your observation on is the issue around target 16. And one of the questions that I raised during the webinar that was held, I think it was last week, was how are we then considering the review of the template based on the lesson learned from the 7th National Report, and as we are moving forward to the preparation of the 8th National Report. And then it comes to the question that James made in terms of the analysis of the headline indicators and their applicability, and based on some of the data gaps and limitations that have already been identified. And another key thing that I also wanted to highlight is the need of aligning both the second global review with the second global report, because I still feel that the two needs to be done simultaneously in order for one to feed to another, because like that time gap might have some limitation in terms of understanding the full picture at 2030. I'm sorry for my lengthy input. Thank you.
Thank you. Bruce and Julie,
one more thing,
Juliette,
sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I intend to be in China. But another key thing is that because it's not coming forward in terms of what will be the role of the global dialogue in strengthening the review process. Because in what we are also getting from the members of the hashtag is that this is an informal process. So it would be good if it was being made a formal process that will contribute to the strengthening of the report or of the review process at COP. Thanks.
Thank you. So Rosa and Juliette, if you want to respond, after that, we'll have James maybe share his screen, and then I'm noting we have 2 questions in the chat to address as well.
Do you want me to start, Rose, and then maybe you can answer on all the... Okay. Maybe go starting with the last question on the informal technical dialogue in Kunming. It is part of the decision of decision 16/32 of the modalities of the global review, because the I don't remember the exact phrasing, but the outcomes of the informal technical dialogue should be, it is a part of the process somehow. So it should be taken up by COP. Could be a report. And I know it was the case, for instance, for the GST process, they also had technical dialogues. There are 3 of those. Leading to the decisions, and the technical dialogues were useful in order to create some kind of ownership, some kind of reflections towards around their own technical assessment. For this one, I think it's quite different because it's after SBSTTA and SBI and before COP. So what I increasingly hear is that parties want to have also the opportunity at Kunming to move forward, with the global review process. But at the same time, there is this line of having an informal technical dialogue with as many stakeholders as possible. So in the notification, you can see that there are a lot of non-party stakeholders that are expected to be there, which I think is quite also really important. But yeah, it should be taken up somehow by the COP. I'm hoping that partially answer your question, but there is a lot of uncertainties around this dialogue. And yeah, good question around the revision of the format for submitting the national report. From what I remember from also some negotiations, discussions within the CBD, there was this wish to have some continuity between the template for the 7th national report and the 8th national report, in order to, not creating some additional burden and having this possibility to hone this format over time. But at the same time, we know that there are some gaps. So how can we maybe identify some clear gaps that could be improved in the next format? Maybe that would be a discussion. I think also Rose may have some consideration around that. So what can be improved in terms of what could be assessed afterwards, and then super aligned with what you're saying on the technical, scientific, and cooperation center, the fact that resources have to be also in the discussion somehow. And we know that there is a lot of differences between the technical centers, and that could be part of the creating ways forward after the global review in order to accelerate action. I think the ways forward should be comprehensive in the, like, okay, there is a key finding, an issue that has been underlined. What should we do about it? But then how are we going to do it? Not only, okay, we have to do this and that, but also we're going to create the right mandate. We're going to call for partners to come into that discussion, or call for resources. And super interested finally about James' analysis around the indicators. I'm not really an expert on the indicators aspects, and I know that there's a lot of articles and experts that could be feeding into that discussion. But what we hear is that it's quite difficult to align with, to use all of the indicators. So that could be also part of the discussion on the global review. And this is also something that we are trying to say with PBL, with Rose, the fact that the next global review definitely can be improved, as well as the next framework. And all of the lessons regarding the use of the indicators is definitely part of that conversation. Sorry, Rose, I took some time.
Don't worry. No, thank you all for your comments and remarks. And I actually wanted to say something that you already mentioned, Juliette, but I think it's indeed it will be difficult and a good discussion to have on how to balance indeed improving reporting and aligning how to measure progress, etc., but without increasing the reporting burden too much, and also ensure this continuity, because we want this review process to build, of course. And for many targets, there's also a problem of measuring progress because we don't know what the baselines are. So we also want to have something to build on and move forward. So this is, I think, maybe a trade-off or a difficult balance to find, and that's very important to also discuss. So indeed, there's so much to mine from the report in terms of the progress that we see happening, but also a lot of considerations for reporting itself and how to improve this review. So yeah, no, a lot to think about. I think I'll leave it at that for now, because I also saw another question for you, Juliette, in the chat, and I'm curious to see the monitoring. So.
Yes, thank you to both of you. I think maybe we can move on to James and his indicator analysis quickly, and then we'll take in questions from the chat.
Just a quick one. Do you want to take those questions first so that you have answered them? I'm just conscious I could end up using more time than may be useful. So maybe answer those first and I'll then come in at the end. Would that be helpful?
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much for that. So we have a question from Anne in the chat asking, when will they decide on how the review will be treated at the SBSTTA-28, line by line, SPM style or similar? I guess it's the Bureau deciding, question mark?
Yes, I believe the usual process is that the Secretariat is suggesting a text for SBSTA or for SBI, and it is of course decided. It is also overseen by the COP Bureau, the Executive Secretary, and so on. I guess it's really going to be soon that we notice that we know what kind of decision was made. It should be published in the next days, I guess. So yeah, my guess is that it's going to be not a line by line, not a SPM style, but maybe more an in-between position. And
Thank
then,
you. Oh, sorry.
yeah, there is another question
Yes.
regarding, wow,
So,
what is feasible? That's a great question, because we don't know how parties will react. We know that I think, as James mentioned, the amount of work that was done is going to be noticed, and I think that's great, and I think that's something that parties would be generally noticing and underlining at SBSTA maybe, but then the ways forward are so political that we don't know. It depends also on the different priorities and the different coalitions and the different sensitivities. There are some groups that are trying to emphasize target 3. There are some groups that are trying to emphasize target 18, others that want to emphasize whole of society approaches. So in the end, there is a difficulty to not make it some kind of list of what we want, but and not only choosing 2 priorities, which would be too little, but finding again the right balance and what could be a set of priorities that are transformative, that are feasible, that are politically acceptable in the current time, and then maybe after there is the COP decision, but there is also everything that is around the global the ecosystem around a COP. And if it's not possible to adopt it in the COP, or if it's too sensitive, there's also a way of moving forward in coalition style formats. Even though we need to protect as much as we can the multilateralism, but that's also a possibility. And Taka was asking about also what it would look like given the current financial and political landscape. And that's, yeah, I think I answered this question.
Yes, and it's not an easy question because, to be honest, it's so unpredictable at this point that it's hard to anticipate. But yes, maybe then we can go over to you, James, if you want to take a few minutes to show us your work. That would be great. Thank you for offering to do that.
Thank you very much indeed. So I'm hoping that will go into full frame mode. Can you just confirm you can see that?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. So what I've done is I've taken the data on the amount of use of the indicators, chucked it into a spreadsheet, and then created some graphs. So this is very crude, and I'm anticipating that there's much more that could be done, but the intention is really just to sort of, from the point of view of having co-chaired the RTEG, I really wanted to see how much had been picked up. And I think the first graph here in terms of the percentage of parties reporting using the different headline indicators is really very illustrative of some of the challenges that parties, I think, are probably facing in terms of, firstly, their priorities, but also in terms of their MBSAPs, but also in terms of actually just getting to grips with implementing the monitoring framework. And it's perhaps no surprise that 3.1 there is one of the highest used ones, on the basis that actually people have generally got stuff around protected area, certainly extent, reasonably well sussed beforehand. So that's the percentage of parties using the headlines. The next one, if it'll move on, damn you. Come on. Yes, thank you. No, that's gone on too. So the binary indicators. So you remember that the RTEG set up a process to identify how to score on an ordinal scale of 0 to 5 the indicators as a result of bringing together the answers to the multiple questions within each of the binary indicators. And again, what this is showing is that there's actually some really good input here. There was 127 parties reporting on the binary indicators out of the 129 reports analysed. And these are the ones, or the percentages, with a progress score of 4 or 5. So basically either fully achieving or partially achieving the questions that were asked. And I think that's actually some really quite good news in places there, particularly around target 5 perhaps, but also around the targets later on, 2020, 22, 23. I think there's some really good news in that in terms of people are grappling. But I think to come back to Antaka's point, there is some real challenges in this and in the previous one in terms of supporting parties through the technical support centres to be able to move forwards. And then this one is looking at the number of parties rather than percentage of parties, which used the headline indicators and used other quantitative indicators. And again, I think it's important to recognise that there's quite a lot of other indicators being used. And if we look at that in a little more detail, there's actually very few complementary and component indicators that have been picked up and used. And I find that very interesting given the structure of the monitoring framework. But there's a lot of national indicators that are being used. And I suspect that that is in part around the timeline between COP16 and the submission date for the 7th national reports, which frankly was very short, but also in terms of people making good use of what they have already. So I hope that's of interest. I'll stop sharing, but that's a very quick look at some data that's not in the report. Well, it is in the report, but it's not graphed in the report. And as I say, I'm hoping there will be more analysis like that within the InfDoc that I think we're anticipating. I'll shut up.
Oh, thank you. I think Juliette actually has a question for you in the chat, which is whether you'll
yes,
be making
I'm happy to make that available. That's not a problem at all.
Okay.
Camille, if I send it to you, perhaps that would
Yeah,
be the sensible thing to
that
do.
would be perfect. And if you're okay with that, we can also add it with the slides on the Co-op for CBD website so people can
Yep.
have access to that. That would be great. And thank you to everyone who stayed a little bit longer over time. I think it was really useful to be able to take a look at that. And yes, I wonder if there's maybe a couple questions for James. Otherwise, we can end the session here because I don't want to keep people for too long, although it was a fascinating session.
And please feel free to send emails if you have additional questions, of course.
All right, I don't see any hands up, so I will close this session, I guess. And I really want to thank the speakers, and I want to thank James also for contributing to the discussion. It was very rich. Thank you for all the questions. As I mentioned, the recording and the slides will be made available on the Co-op for CBD website next week once all the sessions are finished. And please feel free to register for the next two sessions we have left. Tomorrow is on protected areas and Monday is on sustainable wildlife management. You can also catch up once the recordings are available on the other sessions that have already taken place. And I'll stop repeating myself. Thank you again and have a great day and great rest of the week.
Thanks, Camille, for
Thank you all.
organizing this.
Take
My
care.
pleasure.
Bye-bye all.
Thank you. Bye.